As we close out what has been a very interesting and most unexpected 10 days, um, I actually thought it would be a good time for some reflection. And this was brought home to me yesterday. We had a service here in Watford at St Mary's Church. This is the little leaflet that they did. They had the order of service. And one of the things that they did, which is actually quite unusual, and I was saying to a few people there, I actually don't remember, not that I've been to that many funerals, thank goodness, touch wood, but I don't actually remember there being a piece in there about a time for reflection. And I really liked it. I was saying, I don't think I've told my sisters what I want, apart from if I'm no longer there and I'm plugged in, unplug me. But I haven't really thought about what I'd want. And just watching the funeral today, planned to meticulous levels of details, saying to a friend, it's kind of strange to think that the person whose funeral it was has orchestrated all of that and really been clear and, pretty much knew what that would look like anyway, from attending her father's funeral, of course, but having a real clear sense of what her own funeral would be. Um, and it made me think that this is a really cool thing to do, actually, for people like myself who do like a bit of reflection. So they posed 3 questions, and I know that even just posting anything about the Queen on the timeline has garnered several different views, opposing views a lot of the time, those who are very pro-monarchy, those who are very against it, and they've made those views very clear. I'll tell you what the questions are, just in case you want to ponder them for yourself. So it says a time for reflection. There are 3 questions. The first question, number 1, is what stands out for you in your memory about the Queen? Number 2, what will you always remember about her? And number 3, what did you learn through her life and death, including about God in Jesus Christ? And then what they did is they played some music. They had organ pianist there and choir. So they played some music and they gave us a few minutes just to sit and reflect on that. And I actually thought that was really quite interesting. And I was reflecting today, it's going to seem like a really random connection, but I was reflecting today. For 10 years, I designed and delivered leadership development training. And that was an exercise I would do where I'd ask people, who do you think is a good leader? And they'd work in groups, they'd come up with their list, they'd talk to us about the person they've chosen, the people they've chosen, and why, etc. And I was thinking, did anybody ever say Her Majesty the Queen? And I actually don't think so, because when you talk about leadership development, people often think about business and commerce and all of those things, and the Queen isn't necessarily the first person who would come to mind. But then reflecting on what I've been hearing from the stories and what people have been saying, very clearly she was not someone who was out at the forefront, sitting at the head of, well, she was actually at the head of the boardroom table, at the head of the table, but not in that kind of sense. But when you listen to what people have said, she was very powerfully in the background, if not leading by example, then leading by the conversation she was having with people, the sounding board, and that almost that the silent hand of leadership. So it kind of made me think about that as well, and our perceptions and what all of those things mean. It also made me reflect when I'm seeing the both sides of the coin. I'm very aware of the other side of the coin, trust me. It was interesting to hear people voicing that and seeing how people were reacting to that. The conversations then about the Commonwealth, that sparked a whole load of discussions. And so I know when I've worked with people around grief and bereavement, one of the conversations I'm often having, and they realize that themselves, although they maybe don't consciously realize it, because oftentimes the funeral seems like the end of the process. It's like, right, okay, back to work. And actually, the funeral is almost, for some people, the beginning, because the funeral is that public facing piece, but now it's what comes after that. So, and I have spoken to many people recently who this whole scenario for the last 10 days, of course, it's been focused on the Queen, but for many people, it has landed not in terms of just the monarchy, but it has reminded them of their own losses. And many people have had 2 years where things have happened in those 2 years, and it hasn't been the norm, so they haven't grieved in the way they normally would. And I've also spoken to people who it reminds them of losses they've had many, many, many years ago, even decades ago, but it brings some of those memories flooding back. So being at the service yesterday, seeing that actually put the reflection time into the program. I was like, that is so cool. I actually definitely am going to take some time this week in the little pockets of time that I have. It's quite a busy week. Oh my God. Hang on a minute. Yeah, I've got the photo reading workshop this Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So it's totally going to be a busy week, and it's the USA version. So I'm going to be starting at 3 o'clock my time, UK, and working right through to 11 p.m. So it's a busy week coming up, but it just reminds me of the power of building in that time for reflection. And it's not always that you've got time to go up the top of Mount Shasta and do some omming. There are times where you can find little pockets in your day to just stop and reflect. And whether, a bit like Marmite, whether it's been good, bad, or indifferent in terms of what this has brought up for you, I'm always really interested to stop and reflect on that. And kind of go, okay, what do I do with that? Where does that take me? A bit like sometimes if people have been in a bad relationship. For the first 9 years I was in practice, I was a relationship coach. And oftentimes people would be in quite an abusive relationship. Often they knew that. Sometimes it hadn't even really dawned on them because it had been that slow erosion of their sense of self, their sense of identity, their sense of confidence, their sense of self-esteem. But once they had finally kind of gone, whoa, hold on a minute, or something had happened to sever that tie in connection, immediately now they start to think, okay, this has got me to the point where I'm like, okay, no more, never again. I'm like, okay, now where do we go from here? So depending on which side of the fence you're on, it may bring up some things, and it causes you to then decide on the next phase, the next chapter. If a course correction is required, if there's a new direction required, it can often be kind of interesting for that. It also marks the end of the Elizabethan era. It's been a very long era. And so what I did, for those of you who maybe were around a couple of days ago, you might have shared when I shared this picture. To the far side, so furthest away from the camera, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but the woman standing there with the handbag that was all the water and the snacks, that was me. And so for those of you who did do the queue. No, I didn't queue for very long. I only queued for 6 hours, not long in the grand scheme of things when people are queuing for 20 hours and all night, etc. But what you get is the wristband. And so what I also decided to do, because if any of you have been around in the old days where they used to have a lot of ships going out, the Queen would often have the bottle on a string, and I named this ship, and God bless you and all who sail in her, etc. Or the old cutting of the ribbon when you open a new building, etc. And I thought, actually, I like a bit of ceremony. I like to mark the beginning and end of things. So what I decided to do was do a little cutting ceremony for removing the wristband. And it's like, okay, that's the end of that era. Where do we go from here? So it might be a good time for you, depending on where you're at in your life, to do a bit of a punctuation point. And it might be that you're looking at the contrast. Now today, I know it's Pearls Day, and I was like, should I go for the black or the white? So I went for a little bit of a mixture of the both. But yeah, sometimes it's about the contrast, and that will bring something up. Sometimes it's very clearly the ending of something, and you move into something new. And I would say, regardless of which two of those things it is, that's great. What does that bring up for you? What's the next step? Where do you go from here? So I'd say sitting with a moment, a time of reflection is wonderful. And even including it in your own program of service, and taking out Queen, monarchy, etc., putting your name in there, or somebody that you might be unfortunately going to their wake, funeral service, etc. Just be a question to ask people, because I think that's one of the, death, funerals, weirdly, that is sometimes the thing that brings people, families together. And one of the things that I would say is, nice isn't quite the word, but it can be really cathartic to remember the stories. Oh my gosh, do you remember we did this? Remember we did that? Looking at the old photos and these reflection questions that they had for St Mary's Church yesterday, I think did a really nice version of that. So you might go through those questions for yourself, take out the Queen, insert the name of someone that means something to you, and just see what it invokes and what potentially, hopefully, lovely memories that brings forth. So yeah, I'm going to go forth and reflect. I do hope that you are all fit and healthy and well. And yeah, end of an era. Let us see what the next chapter brings. I will catch you all later.